Hello, Awesome Soul here, and by the time you're probably watching this video, the TX Cubes and Health Boost update is now out. A little bit of a mouthful for a simple update title, but it is very accurate. Now, I'm here to obviously tell you what exactly is in this update, but not only that, I also have some tweets pertaining to the update after this one, so what exactly we can expect to see a little later on. First off though, we will be going through the patch notes, reading them out, and of course, giving my thoughts on them. First up, we have the big meat of this update, and that is chassis shape equalization. So the basic rundown of this is that all chassis shapes, whether it be the cube, the edge, the corner, the inner, etc., will now have the same weight and the same health. But they also have a new stat that is just coming in this update, but I'll save that for a little bit. Some of you may already know what that is, but for those first joining us, I will leave that there as a little bit of a mystery, until of course we get through this part. So the reasoning behind this is basically for players to be able to build a lot more creatively without having to spam full cubes just simply because they have the most health. So the regular cube, which is now called the health cube in this update, has the same stats that we had heard of previously, so those have stayed the same. And those being 10 kilograms for each block, 1 CPU per block, and 1,500 health per block. Now that might seem a little lower than you might expect if you're just tuning in now and haven't had any exposure to some of my previous videos. But not to worry, because the new stat that I was talking about is actually going to increase this health value a decent bit. Anyway, the light chassis is also something new that's in the update. It used to be called the TX Cube back when Megabots were introduced. They added the Mega Armor. This is also when tiers were a thing, so Tier X or Tier Mega or Mega Tier, whichever you prefer to call it. But they've reworked it, and now they're calling it the light chassis. But what is really cool here is that the cube itself has a special texture to it. Kind of like a computer chip, almost. Like electrical wiring, or fancy, futuristic electrical wiring, I guess you could say. These blocks are not just light, they're also a lot tankier, but cost 3 CPU. So they are only 2 kilograms, and that of course is 2 kilograms for all the cube shapes, 3 CPU, like I said, and 4,500 health, which is certainly pretty high. So what I really like what they're doing here is these light cubes are good for more things than just simply making your bot lighter. Just because they have a lot of health packed into a smaller area, they're good for protecting gun mounts or weak points in your bot. Although that's what I assume here. It's going to be interesting to see how the meta evolves, and will my prediction be right? Or will we just simply see them being used for light bots only? And speaking of light bots, what you could do if you wanted to and had the necessary funds, because these things are a little bit more pricey than the regular cubes, you have to keep that in mind. But what Mark has said on numerous occasions is that you can use these cubes due to their higher CPU cost, and basically how I said you could pack a lot of armor into a smaller area. So if you wanted to, you could make a full CPU bot, aka 2000 CPU, out of entirely TX cubes. So you would still be pretty damn tanky, but you would be a lot smaller of a target and therefore harder to hit. Whether or not that will be viable until the next update, which I'll cover near the end of the video, well, that will be anyone's guess. I guess we'll just have to wait and see, of course. Obviously though, I'm recording this before the update, so I don't know exactly. I haven't yet had a chance to play around with everything. Anyways, next point, and this is all about that new value I was talking about, or new stat, I guess you could say, and that is the health boost stat. So each of the 2 chassis shapes, aka the health or the light, when placed on your robot, will grant you a 0.05% health bonus. So that is actually new, because previously, when it was talked about, it was going to be a 0.1% buff. But it seems that Mark has definitely gone through with what he was talking about on Twitter. So he's cut that buff in half, And as I stated in a previous video when I was covering this topic, if he needs to buff this stat, he will, or if he needs to nerf it, he will. It's just that the 0.1 turned out to be a little bit too high, at least in the eyes of a lot of players, and Mark definitely seemed to agree with that, so we now have this value. So, simple rundown of what this health boost is. All the cubes have a health boost value, and on the new and improved robot stat screen, you will be able to see this value. Say, for example, you have a 10% health boost, and that will mean every part, including the cubes, will be buffed by 10%. So their armor/health will be buffed by 10%. This means that your wheels will be a lot stronger, your plasma cannons will be a lot stronger, your flak cannon will be a lot stronger. You get the idea. Literally everything on your bot will be boosted by this value. But not all cubes are created equally, so the appropriately named health cube will actually, in the long run, provide you a higher health boost value. Both cubes actually provide the same value, which is 0.05. However, with the health cubes being 1 CPU and the light cubes being 3 CPU, this means that for the cost of 3 CPU, with a health cube, you will get 0.15% of bonus. But with 3 CPUs worth of a light cube, that means you will only be getting 0.5%. So you can kind of mix and match here if you really wanted to. Or you could go for either or. Really depends on what kind of a build you're going for. Next up, we come to the stuff that's actually new and hasn't really been ever heard before. This being that the garage bay and the garage selection screen, the carousel, as they're referring to it here, is getting an improvement. So instead of having those tiny little buttons on the tiny little preview screen, what we're now getting is a bar above the carousel, as they call it, or the garage bay selection row, is what I refer to it as. And not only that, but the edit and test robot buttons have also been moved there. So no longer do you have to go into the play menu, you can simply do it from the garage bay. Just hit escape and then go ahead and build that way. Or you can test that way as well. This should make things a lot more clearer, especially for new players. The next bit is something that I have wanted for quite a while, however it comes at a slight cost. But it's not really that big of a deal. So the robot stat screen is now available in the Garage Bay preview screen. That's right, so no longer do you need to actually go in and load up your garage build mode in order to see the stats. You can do it immediately when scrolling through all of your bots. Unfortunately, the one downside here is the fact that they are removing the CPU strip from the bot selection strip. Not to worry though, the CPU will still be available, but you just have to click on that individual bot in order to see it. From what it looks like, the reason they're doing this is because the way they had the CPU laid out before, it was a little strip on top of the preview image. But that strip is now taken up by the new button system, where they have edit, test, configure, upload, and dismantle. Now, for me personally, I really enjoyed sorting my robots by CPU and by class, so I would have a sprinter class and then sort that by CPU, a mech class and then sort that by CPU, etc, etc. But now it's just one extra step, but really it's not that big of a deal. There's also another feature they're adding, and that is the ability to disable chat entirely. Although, if I recall, this was actually a feature in the past, but it was removed for some reason, so I guess now it's back. And this is very good, especially for those who like taking screenshots, or for those who like to record video, such as myself. Not entirely sure if I will turn it on, maybe for specific reasons, but when I'm just playing and gathering B-roll, such as the stuff you're watching in the background, then I'll most likely leave it on, because I do like to see what other people are saying. Or if people recognize me, I can go ahead and say hello to you. But that's not everything. There are a few more tiny little improvements they have here as well. So what they say, all standard cubes have been renamed to health cubes. I already covered that. Add Bay button is now renamed to build from scratch. Browse robots button is now renamed to get more robots. There are also general improvements to the CRF sorting and robot shown by default. So I have noticed this myself. The front page of the CRF has certainly not been what it used to. But yeah, I've noticed a change in the CRF recently. We haven't really gotten the best bots rising to the top. It's kind of been stagnant, I guess you could say. Hasn't really been changing. So hopefully these improvements will set it back to how it was before. Anyways, finishing off the list, the edit and test mode buttons have been removed from the custom game screen, as they now can be found above the garage bay slot. Players dismantling all their robots in their bay will no longer result in 3 empty slots. Players will now have 1 empty garage slot. But obviously you can still create more. If you don't know what I'm referring to, say for example you had a new account, and you wanted to get rid of the 3 bots you had by default, you go ahead and dismantle one of them, and you'll be left with an empty garage bay. It won't actually delete it. So yeah, slightly annoying, but not really. These are just slight improvements, obviously. Anyways, the last 2. Tutorial renamed to Robot Building Tutorial, and Curse Voice logo has been removed from the login screen, which honestly was only really a matter of time. I have only ever used Curse Voice like once or twice, and that was when it was first added. This was before Discord was a thing too, so we really didn't have that easy of communication, but even when we had Curse Voice, nobody really used it. I maybe talked to like 1 person, and the other time I used it was just pure silence with somebody kind of breathing heavily into the microphone. And the recent stories I've heard from the 1 or 2 people that still actually use it, yeah, they pretty much confirm the same thing. Now, there are some bug fixes as well, but if you would like to read those for yourself, the link to this article can be found in the description of the video. But now, as promised, news on the next update. So these tweets are all from Mark. First one we'll be going with is Cluely, saying, I hope this is the case, but I think it's dependent on the reworked speed cap. If there is a hard cap, it's just a case of building to that. However, Mark responds with, there is no hard cap, aka no hard speed cap, I promise. Now, don't get too excited, because he specifically says there's no hard cap. He does not say there is no cap at all. So what most likely will be the case is there is a soft cap, meaning that it gets progressively harder and harder to push your bot to higher and higher speeds. But chances are that will be more so for the extreme speeds. So trying to get over 300 miles per hour. Anyways, he continues with, however, it won't get removed until the aerofoils are out though, which is, as he confirms here, the next update. We have heard a few times say that the aerofoils will be out next update, so that seems like it's still the plan for that to happen. Next tweet we have is somebody named The Awesome Soul. Not entirely sure who they are, but they seem like a pretty cool person. Anyways, they state, I have concerns, not exactly about this update, but the next one. I feel that if you take the full power, quote, removal path, then new players will be very weak, since they will not really have access to fill their CPU to 2000. Obviously, they'll have no access to modules, no access to heavy weapons, or a large amount of TX, because as I discussed in the last video I did on Robocraft, each TX cube is 120 robits a pop. Although, however, you do have to keep in mind that they are 3 CPU each. And the way the pricing system works in Robocraft is that both rarity and CPU go into factoring how expensive the part will cost, with the regular cubes being counted as common and the TX cubes being counted as uncommon. Pricing structure will be fairly different. Now, Mark responds to this tweet by saying, I am considering adding a noob tier to cover this problem, i.e. you start with 1000 CPU and then graduate to the bigger league. Yes, kind of like tiers. Although I'm not entirely sure that's set in stone, because we did have a good discussion for a little bit, and it seems like he's also saying that because they have an MMR system, which is like a matchmaking skill-based system, new players will have super low MMR, and obviously they will be matched with newer players who also have low MMR rating. Personally, I'm still not 100% sold on this full removal system, but now that Mark Mark has addressed some of my concerns, I can rest a little bit easier than before. Onward to the next tweet, and this one has Rafifu saying that I really hope you do something special with the rudders then. Obviously that's the key word there, not the aerofoils, which are the wing parts, but specifically the rudders. And Mark responds with, done something really special. Been working on them for ages now. So could this mean that rudders now have a new unique purpose over the aerofoil? Or are they going to be a lower CPU option, possibly without the VTOL functionality that they have talked about previously? I'm not entirely sure, and we don't really have a whole lot of information there, but I figured that would be an interesting bit of news to throw in. And last but not least, in the last video we talked about them improving the garage bay camera, but not only that, it seems like we are going to be getting improvements to the in-game camera. So, Awesome Scarab says, you really can't see anything if your camera is too close, referring to his Megabot. Mark says, working on improvements to the camera for Megas at the moment. Will roll out with the update after next. Obviously though, he tweeted this out before today's update is out. So does this mean we're going to be getting it in the update after the Health and Light Cube update? AKA the one where you get the wings. Not entirely sure, but this is definitely a good thing, because even for some of my mechs, I have had problems with the camera being a little bit too close to their backside. It's kind of, I don't know, it's a bit annoying. Not really the biggest deal, but I'm sure for Megabot users, it is incredibly aggravating to stare at nothing but a wall of cubes, taking up about half your screen. But that will do it for all of the news. I'm curious as to what your opinion is on everything discussed here. Let me know in the comment section down below. And with that, guys, I of course have been the Awesome Soul. I thank you so very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Take care.